A single mother-to-be thought she was alone at the ranch until the owner showed up. A forbidden love was born by accident and changed their lives forever. A story that will touch your heart. Subscribe, leave a like, and comment where you are watching from. The March sun beat down mercilessly on the golden fields surrounding Hope Ranch, creating heat waves that distorted the landscape on the horizon. Emily adjusted the strap of her worn suitcase on her shoulder, feeling the weight of her 6-month baby bump pulling at her aching back. The light blue floral dress, the only clean one left in her luggage, clung to her sweaty body as she walked along the dirt road leading to the property. Finally, she murmured to herself, spotting the outline of the main house through the branches of the fruit trees. The place looked abandoned, just as the information she had gathered at the bus station in Springfield indicated. No signs of movement, just the songs of robins echoing among the lush foliage. Emily had delicate features that contrasted with the iron determination in her brown eyes. At 26, she carried a curious mix of apparent fragility and inner strength forged by her circumstances. Her light brown hair, pulled back into a simple bun due to the heat, framed a face that still held the sweetness of youth, despite the marks of suffering that only a keen observer could detect. "This will be our refuge, little ones," she whispered, gently caressing her belly. "Far away from all that madness in New York. Away from Mark and his shouting. Here you can grow in peace." The rural property stretched for acres, with pastures that seemed to go on forever, and an orchard that looked inviting under the generous shade of the century-old mango trees. The main house, a one-story building with a wide porch and clay tiles, showed signs of recent abandonment. Some windows with shutters closed, weeds growing at the edges of the garden, but nothing that indicated complete deterioration. Emily instinctively headed toward the orchard. Hunger had been gnawing at her stomach for hours since she got off the bus in the neighboring town with her last $15 in her pocket. The mango trees were laden with ripe fruit, some already fallen to the ground, perfuming the air with their sweet, tropical aroma. She took off her shoes, feeling the warm earth between her toes, and approached a particularly generous tree. "Sorry, dear mango tree," she said softly, as she used to when she was a child at her grandparents' farm in Kentucky. "But my babies and I are very hungry." She carefully stretched out, avoiding sudden movements that could harm her pregnancy, and began to pick the ripest mangoes, placing them in the hem of her dress, transformed into an improvised basket. The juice dripped down her fingers as she peeled one of the fruits, and for the first time in months a genuine smile lit up her face. It was then that she heard the sound of hooves approaching. The rhythmic noise against the dirt made her heart race. Emily turned slowly, still holding the half-peeled mango, and saw a man riding a medium-sized bay horse emerging between the trees. The rider wore a weathered leather hat, a blue and white checkered shirt with rolled-up sleeves, and boots that showed years of work in the field. Jake Thompson, at 34, had the appearance of someone who had grown up between two worlds. Although he was born in the bustling city, his movements revealed a genuine familiarity with rural life. Tall, broad-shouldered, and sun-kissed skin, he had green eyes that could be both kind and piercing, depending on the situation. His calloused hands held the reins naturally, while dark brown hair peeked out from under the hat, slightly tousled by the wind. "Hey, who's there?" he shouted, spurring the horse to come closer. Emily dropped all the mangoes she was holding, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. Her hands trembled as she tried to wipe the sticky juice on her dress in a desperate attempt to regain her composure. I didn't know anyone was here," she stammered, taking a step back and slightly tripping over an exposed root. "I thought the place was abandoned." Jake dismounted the horse with agility, tying the reins to a low branch of the mango tree. His initial expression of suspicion, after all, this woman could be an intruder, began to change when he noticed Emily's state. The simple dress, the clearly pregnant belly, the bare feet in the dirt, the tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Easy, easy," he said, removing his hat and revealing a sun-kissed face, but with aristocratic features that hinted at his urban origins. "You don't need to be afraid. This ranch is mine, but you're not in danger." "Yours?" Emily felt her legs weaken. But people in town said it had been abandoned for years, that the former owner had died and no one took care of it anymore. Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. "My grandfather did pass away 3 years ago, but I recently inherited the property. I'm trying to bring this place back to life, to turn it into something productive and sustainable. You're not the first person to think it was abandoned." Emily's eyes filled with tears. She tried to hold back, biting her lower lip. The shame of being caught stealing fruit mixed with the desperation of having nowhere to go. Her hands instinctively positioned themselves over her belly, a protective gesture that did not go unnoticed by Jake. "I'm not a thief," she said, with a dignity that contrasted with her precarious situation. "I mean, not normally. I was just very hungry, and the babies too. I haven't eaten anything since yesterday morning." "Babies? In plural?" Jake stepped closer, noticing the signs of extreme fatigue on Emily's face. Deep dark circles, chapped lips, the paleness contrasting with the natural tan of her skin. "They're twins," she replied softly, as if Emily was still getting used to the idea. "I found out not long ago. That's why my belly is so big for 6 months." A heavy silence settled between them, punctuated only by the chirping of robins and the wind rustling the leaves of the mango trees. Jake observed the fragile woman in front of him, seeing something in her eyes that awakened painful memories of his own childhood, the same vulnerability his mother had shown when she was left alone and pregnant after his father abandoned them. "Where did you come from?" he asked, trying to sound less intimidating. "Los Angeles." Emily took a deep breath, as if gathering the courage to tell her story was an immense physical effort. "I ran away from a relationship that was difficult. Mark, my ex-partner, he—" Her voice faltered, and she swallowed hard before continuing. "He didn't take the news of the pregnancy well. He said I was trying to trap him, that the kids weren't even his. The arguments started to get violent." Jake's hands involuntarily clenched into fists. There was something in the way Emily spoke, the way her shoulders slightly hunched inward, that told him the violence had gone beyond words. "Don't you have family? Friends?" he insisted. "My mother lives in Kentucky near Lexington. She can't help me. She's alone too, working on other people's farms." Emily wiped away a stubborn tear that escaped. "And in Los Angeles, everyone I knew was Mark's friend too. He's a lawyer, has influence. I knew that if I stayed, he would find a way to take my children from me when they were born." Jake fell, silent for a few moments, digesting her story. The sun was already lower on the horizon, painting everything around them in golden and orange hues. The scent of ripe mangoes mixed with the smell of damp earth that hinted at a possible evening rain. "What's your name?" he finally asked. Emily Fields." "Jake Thompson," he introduced himself, extending his hand in a formal gesture that, in the context of the situation, felt almost surreal. "And why did you choose this specific farm to hide?" Emily shook his hand, noticing the firmness and calluses that spoke of hard work, but also the gentleness with which he touched her, as if she were made of porcelain. "I didn't exactly choose," she admitted. "I took the first bus out of Los Angeles to the countryside. When I arrived in Springfield, an older woman at the bus station told me about this place. She said it had been abandoned and that maybe I could stay here for a few days until I decided what to do." "And what do you intend to do?" The question hung in the air, like the fragrance of yellow ivy flowers beginning to bloom around the orchard. Emily looked around, at the land stretching as far as the eye could see, at the house that could be a home, at the man who, against all expectations, was not immediately kicking her out. "I don't know," she replied with brutal honesty. "I just know I can't go back, and that these two babies need to be born in a safe place where no one can hurt them. Or me." Jake looked at Emily, really looked, noticing the strength that existed behind her apparent fragility, the determination shining in her eyes, despite the fear, the dignity she maintained, even in such a vulnerable situation. And for some reason he couldn't fully explain. He knew he couldn't just send her away. "All right," he finally said, surprising both himself and her. "You can stay, temporarily," he quickly added, as if that caveat made the decision less impulsive. "There's a smaller house here on the farm where the workers used to live. It's a bit messy, but it's livable. You can use it while you decide what to do with your life." Emily stared at him with wide eyes, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Really? You would let a strange, pregnant woman stay on your property? What if I'm crazy? What if I'm dangerous?" Jake let out a low laugh, the first since the conversation began. "Looking at you now, barefoot and crying over some mangoes, I think the risk is minimal." The month of April brought with it a routine that Emily had never imagined possible. The workers' house, although small and in need of repairs, offered something she hadn't had in months: peace. Built of simple masonry with 2 tiny bedrooms, a living room that connected directly to the kitchen, and a basic bathroom. The residence was about 200 meters from the main house, surrounded by a wild garden where herbs like mint, basil, and boldo grew spontaneously. Emily always woke up to the sound of robins around 5:30 in the morning, when the sun was still painting the sky with pink hues. Her belly had grown considerably, and the twins moved more frequently, especially when she walked through the fields or worked in the small medicinal garden she had decided to plant behind the house. "Good morning, little ones," she murmured every morning, stroking her belly as she prepared a lemon balm. "Tea harvested from her own garden. Today we're going to help Jake with the big garden, and then I'll finish organizing those old papers he asked for." On that particular April morning, Emily wore a loose light yellow cotton blouse, one of the few pieces that still fit her, and a pair of jeans that no longer fully closed, having to use an elastic to keep them in place. She slipped on her worn flat sandals and followed the dirt path that connected her house to the main property. Jake was already working on planting organic corn when she approached. Even from a distance, she could see him among the green rows, using a hoe to loosen the soil around the young plants. He had risen before dawn, as he did every day since he decided to transform the farm into a sustainable project. "Good morning, Jake," she shouted, waving with genuine enthusiasm. He lifted his head, taking off his hat to wipe the sweat from his forehead with the sleeve of his red and white checkered shirt. A smile automatically formed on his face as he saw her approaching with that morning energy that always impressed him. "Good morning, Emily. How did you 3 spend the night?" "The little ones were restless, but I managed to sleep well," she replied, stopping at a respectful distance. During these weeks of living together, they had established a careful cordiality, maintaining clear boundaries that protected both her vulnerability and the growing attraction he felt and tried to ignore. "Today, I thought I would continue organizing the office documents, if you don't mind, and then I wanted to tend to the medicinal garden a bit more. The chamomile plants need to be transplanted." "Of course, no problem. Just be careful not to overdo it." Jake moved closer to her, noticing how the morning sun created golden reflections in her brown hair. "By the way, Mrs. Johnson is preparing a hearty breakfast. Why don't you go over there? She worries when you don't eat enough." Mrs. Johnson had been the cook at the ranch for over 20 years, a robust 62-year-old woman with completely white hair, always tied up in a bun, and a heart that seemed to have infinite space to care for everyone around. A widow for a decade, she lived in a small house at the back of the property and treated Jake like a son, especially after he decided to move permanently to the ranch. When Emily entered the spacious kitchen of the main house, the aroma of cheese bread baking in the wood-fired oven filled her nostrils, making her eyes well up with tears of nostalgia. That smell immediately transported her back to her grandparents' farm in Kentucky, to childhood mornings where her biggest worry was deciding whether to play in the chicken coop or the orchard. "Girl, you are more beautiful every day," exclaimed Mrs. Johnson, wiping her hands on her floral apron to embrace Emily with maternal affection. "That belly is growing beautifully. The little ones must be strong as little bulls." "They are, Mrs. Johnson. They move around so much that sometimes it feels like they're dancing inside," Emily laughed, sitting down in the wooden chair that the cook always reserved for her near the wood stove. "That's a sign of health, my daughter. My mother always said that a child who moves a lot in the belly is born smart and brave." Mrs. Johnson served a deep plate of oatmeal seasoned with cinnamon and honey, accompanied by 3 steaming cheese breads and a large glass of warm milk. "Eat it all, because you're eating for 3 now." Emily attacked the food with the appetite that pregnancy had given her, but also with the gratitude of someone who had recently gone hungry. Between spoonfuls, she told Mrs. Johnson about her plans for the medicinal garden, about the recipes her grandmother had taught her for healing teas, about the strange yet comforting feeling of putting down roots in that place. "You know, Mrs. Johnson," Emily said, thoughtfully chewing a piece of cheese bread, "sometimes I feel like I've known this place before, as if my soul had been here before." The cook stopped stirring the beans she was preparing for lunch and looked at Emily with a curious expression. "Funny you say that, girl. Jake mentioned the same thing the other day. He said that since you arrived, the ranch feels more complete, as if something was missing that he didn't even know was there." Before Emily could respond, the sound of an approaching engine on the access road cut through the conversation. Mrs. Johnson frowned, wiping her hands on her apron as she headed to the kitchen window that overlooked the main yard. "Different car," she murmured. "We weren't expecting anyone today." Emily felt a chill in her stomach that had nothing to do with the food. Instinctively, her hands positioned themselves protectively over her belly, while her heart raced with an anxiety that had become a conditioned reflex whenever something unexpected happened. The vehicle that stopped in front of the main house was a white Corolla, a recent model, with license plates from Los Angeles. A stylish woman stepped out, wearing an impeccably tailored dark grey suit, high-heeled shoes that seemed inappropriate for the rural terrain, and carrying a brown leather briefcase. Her dark brown hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and sunglasses hid her eyes, but her body language radiated authority and impatience. "Who is that?" Emily asked, feeling the oatmeal turn to lead in her stomach. "Margaret," Mrs. Johnson replied, with a tone that mixed resignation and concern. "Jake's sister. A lawyer, lives in Los Angeles, takes care of the family business. And by the way, she's marching to the door. She didn't come for a social visit." Jake appeared, coming from the fields, still carrying the hoe and with his boots dirty from the earth. Even from a distance, Emily could see the tension in his shoulders when he recognized his sister's car. He leaned the tool against the wall of the porch and went to meet Margaret, who was already climbing the steps to the main entrance. "Margaret." Jake took off his hat, greeting his sister with a kiss on the cheek that seemed more formal than affectionate. "What a surprise. You didn't tell me you were coming." "I didn't notify you because I knew you would come up with an excuse not to be here," Margaret replied, removing her sunglasses and revealing green eyes identical to her brother's, but as cold as ice. "We need to talk, Jake, and from what I've heard, there are some issues that need urgent clarification." Emily could hear the conversation through the open kitchen window. and Margaret's tone immediately activated her maternal protective instincts. She got up from the chair, with care, supporting one hand on the table to balance the extra weight of her belly. "Mrs. Johnson," she whispered, "I think it's best if I go back home." "No, my dear," the cook gently held Emily's arm. "You haven't done anything wrong. This conversation is going to happen anyway, and it's better that everything is clarified once and for all." On the porch, the tension between the siblings was palpable. Margaret, at 40, had dedicated her life to building a solid career as a corporate lawyer, always looking after the financial interests of the Thompson family. She viewed her brother's decision to abandon a promising engineering career to pursue farming as a costly and irresponsible whim. "So it's true," Margaret said, crossing her arms and staring at Jake with the look she used to intimidate opponents in court. "You really brought a pregnant stranger to live here. A stranger who appeared out of nowhere with no references, no verifiable history." "Emily is not a stranger," Jake replied, crossing his arms in a defensive posture that mirrored his sister's. "And she didn't appear out of nowhere. She was going through a tough situation and needed help." "Tough situation?" Margaret let out a humorless laugh. "Jake, do you really believe this damsel in distress story, a young woman, pregnant, who conveniently runs away from Los Angeles and ends up right on the property of a wealthy bachelor?" "Don't talk about her like that." Jake's voice took on a warning tone that Emily had never heard before. "You don't know her story." "And you do? Did you check anything she told you? Did you research if this so-called violent ex-boyfriend actually exists? Or did you just take everything at face value because she's pretty and needed help?" The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Emily, in the kitchen, felt tears burning her eyes, but a dull anger was also beginning to grow in her chest. It wasn't the first time her word was questioned, that her motivations were distorted. Mark had done this constantly, turning every request for help into manipulation, every display of vulnerability into an attempt at blackmail. "Margaret!" Jake ran his hand through his hair, a gesture that Emily had learned to recognize as a sign that he was struggling to maintain his patience. "Emily will stay here as long as necessary. She's helping with organizing documents, taking care of a medicinal garden, and—" "Oh, how convenient," Margaret interrupted. "She made herself indispensable quickly. And when the babies are born, are you going to play the role of the stepfather too? Are you going to make those children heirs to the ranch that our grandfather built with so much sacrifice?" The kitchen door swung open more forcefully than Emily intended. She emerged onto the porch with a flushed face, her hands trembling slightly, but with a determination burning in her brown eyes that made both Jake and Margaret turn to her in surprise. "Excuse me," Emily said, her voice low but firm. "I know I wasn't invited to this conversation, but since it's about me, I think I have the right to participate." Margaret examined her from head to toe, noting the simple dress, the worn sandals, the prominent belly, and clearly reaching conclusions she had already formed before even meeting her in person. "So you are Emily," Margaret said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "The damsel in distress that my brother decided to save." "I didn't ask to be saved by anyone," Emily replied, walking to stand beside Jake, but keeping a distance that made it clear she didn't expect protection from him. "And I'm not here for your family's money. I'm here because I had nowhere else to go, and your brother was kind enough to offer me temporary shelter." "Temporary?" Margaret raised an eyebrow. "So you have plans to leave?" The question hit Emily like a punch in the stomach. The truth was that during those weeks on the ranch, she had begun to imagine a life there, raising her children in that healthy environment, contributing with work, being part of that small community. But, confronted directly with the question, she realized she had never discussed it clearly with Jake. Emily hesitated, glancing at Jake, who was watching the exchange with a tense expression. "I don't know yet. It depends on many things." "Of course it depends," Margaret murmured. "Mainly on how long I can keep my brother interested." The comment was the last straw. Emily felt the blood rush to her cheeks, and the anger she'd been suppressing finally exploded. "Listen here, Mrs. Margaret," she said, stepping closer to her potential sister-in-law with a courage that surprised everyone present, including herself. "I don't know what kind of woman you're used to meeting, but I'm not a gold digger. I worked, paid my bills, had my independent life before I got pregnant, and everything went wrong. And if I'm here, it's because I need a safe place for my children to be born, not because I want anything from your brother other than respect and dignity." Margaret stepped back slightly, clearly not expecting such a direct reaction. "Then prove it," she challenged. "If you really have no interest in the family estate, sign a document renouncing any future claims to this property." The silence that followed was broken only by the song of a robin in the nearby mango tree. Emily stared at Margaret for long seconds, feeling the weight of the challenge and also the pain of seeing her integrity questioned once again. Jake stepped forward, clearly ready to intervene, but Emily raised a hand to stop him. "I'll sign," she said calmly. "I have no problem signing any paper you want, as long as it convinces you that I'm not a freeloader." The response caught Margaret off guard. She had expected refusal, tears, perhaps an attempt to manipulate Jake into defending her. Emily's calm and dignified acceptance threw her strategy off balance. "Jake," Margaret said, turning to the brother, said, "Do you see how clever she is? She agrees to sign because she knows you wouldn't allow it." "Enough, Margaret." Jake's voice was low, but filled with an authority that made his sister stop speaking immediately. "Emily, you are not signing any papers. This is my ranch, my decision on who can stay here, and if Margaret has a problem with that, she can leave." The confrontation had escalated beyond what any of the three expected. Emily felt the twins moving restlessly in her belly, as if they could sense the tension in the air. Her legs began to shake, not from fear, but from emotional exhaustion. She had escaped a relationship where she constantly had to defend her integrity, only to find herself in a similar situation. "You know what?" Emily said, with a calmness that contrasted with the turmoil of emotions in her chest. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I should just leave. I don't want to be the cause of a fight between siblings, and I definitely don't want to stay in a place where my presence is constantly questioned." She turned to Jake, and he could see tears in her eyes, but also an unwavering determination. "Jake, thank you for everything you've done for me and my children. I will pack my things." Emily descended the steps of the porch with all the dignity she could muster, leaving the Johnson siblings in a silence, thick with tension and regret. The following 2 weeks after the confrontation with Margaret transformed the dynamics of Hope Ranch in ways no one had anticipated. Emily, true to her word, had packed her few belongings and moved into a small rented room in Springfield, where she found work at a downtown flower shop. Jake, on the other hand, threw himself into farm work with an almost obsessive intensity, rising before dawn and only returning to the main house after darkness had enveloped the fields. Mrs. Johnson observed the melancholy that had settled in her kitchen during the silent dinners. She prepared for Jake. The boss, as she still affectionately called him, stirred his food on the plate with little appetite, lost in thoughts that seemed as heavy as the rain clouds gathering on the horizon. That May morning, while Jake checked the fence of the pasture where he intended to introduce organic beef cattle, Mrs. Johnson decided she had waited long enough. She found him fixing a loose board, hammering harder than necessary, as if he could drive out his frustration through the wood. "Boy!" she called, using the maternal tone she reserved for special occasions. "You need to stop with all this agony. You're eating poorly, sleeping worse, and treating that hammer as if it's to blame for something." Jake stopped hammering and turned to the cook, noticing the concerned yet determined expression on her weathered face. "I'm fine, Mrs. Johnson, just focused on work." "Focused my foot," she retorted, crossing her arms over her floral apron. "You're suffering because of Emily, and it's no use pretending otherwise. That girl left a hole in this ranch that even the chickens can feel." Jake sighed, dropping the hammer and sitting on the newly repaired fence. The May sun was milder than the previous month, but it still warmed him through the light blue cotton shirt he wore. "It's not that simple, Mrs. Johnson. Margaret is right about some things. I barely know Emily. I don't know anything about her past, about this whole story with her ex-boyfriend." "And why didn't you find out?" interrupted the cook, stepping closer and leaning against the fence beside him. "Why didn't you go after the truth instead of sitting here brooding? You have contacts in Los Angeles. You have resources. If you want to know who Emily really is, go find out." Mrs. Johnson's suggestion echoed in Jake's mind for the rest of the day. While supervising the planting of organic beans and discussing crop rotation with the workers, a part of his mind was devising a plan. He did indeed have contacts in Los Angeles. Old college friends who worked in law firms, private investigators his own family had used to vet business partners. If he wanted to uncover the truth about Emily, he could do it. 3 days later, Jake was in his makeshift office in the main house, surrounded by papers documenting not only the agricultural project of the ranch, but also a discreet investigation into Emily Fields. The report he had received via email the previous morning was printed in front of him, revealing details that made him question not only his prejudices, but also his ability to judge people's character. Emily Fields had graduated in education from St. Jude University, working for 3 years as a preschool teacher at a private school in the West Side neighborhood. Her superiors described her as dedicated, caring with the children, and extremely responsible. She had met Mark Johnson, a real estate attorney, at a mutual friend's birthday party. The relationship, which lasted 2 years, had started off seemingly normal, but the records showed a concerning escalation. Mark had a history of 3 police reports for domestic violence with ex-girlfriends, all later withdrawn by the victims, a common pattern in cases of violence against women. More revealing, Emily had sought help from the Women's Support Center on 2 occasions, but had never completed the reporting process. The investigator had managed to speak with 2 of Emily's colleagues at the school. Both confirmed that she had lost weight drastically in the last months of the relationship, frequently missed work with vague excuses about personal problems, and showed clear signs of someone living under extreme stress. One of them, a more experienced teacher named Carmen, had tried to convince Emily to seek help, but she always refused, claiming she was overreacting to the situation. The pregnancy had been... In January, a discovery was made. According to the medical report that the investigator managed to access through contacts at the hospital where Emily was receiving prenatal care, she had arrived at her first appointment with clear signs of recent abuse, a bruise on her left arm and scratches on her neck that she attributed to a fall down the stairs. Jake felt a knot form in his stomach as he read the details. The story that Emily had told was not only true, but likely minimized. The young teacher had indeed escaped from a domestic violence situation that could have escalated into something much worse after the birth of the babies. What impressed Jake the most, however, were the details about Emily's character that emerged from the report. Former students and parents described her as an exceptional educator who often used her own resources to buy school supplies for underprivileged children. She had organized clothing and toy drives during the winters and maintained a volunteer literacy project for adults in the community where she lived. "She is exactly who I thought she was," Jake murmured to himself, folding the papers and putting them away in the drawer of the old desk that had belonged to his grandfather. At that moment, Mrs. Johnson entered the office carrying a tray with coffee and warm cheese bread. "By the way you're acting, you discovered something important," she commented, serving the coffee in the white porcelain cup that Jake always used. "I discovered that I'm an idiot," he replied, accepting the cup and inhaling the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee. "And I found out that I need to go after Emily as soon as possible." "That's exactly what I was going to say." Mrs. Johnson sat down in the chair across from the desk, something she only did when she had serious matters to discuss. "But before you run off like a madman, there's something I need to tell you about Emily, about this ranch, and about her family." Jake raised his eyes, intrigued by the cook's mysterious tone. "What are you talking about, Mrs. Johnson? You remember that? I've worked here for over 20 years, right? I knew your grandfather. I met your grandmother before she passed away. I saw this place in very different times." Mrs. Johnson stirred the sugar into her coffee with slow movements, as if organizing old memories. "In the 1990s, when you were still a child and came to spend vacations here, your grandfather had an administrator, a very competent woman who handled all the documentation, payments, and organization of the harvests." Jake nodded, vaguely remembering a female figure who was always present during his childhood visits, but whose face he couldn't visualize clearly. Her name was Sarah Fields. The coffee almost slipped from Jake's hand. "Fields, like Emily." "Her mother," confirmed Mrs. Johnson with a small smile. "Sarah worked here for almost 10 years until your grandfather modernized the administration and moved everything to offices in Los Angeles. She was a hard-working woman, raising her daughter alone after her husband died in a work accident." Jake abruptly stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the orchard where he had first met Emily. "Are you telling me that that she has a real connection to this place?" "More than that." Mrs. Johnson also stood up, moving closer to the window. "Sarah brought Emily here a few times when she was little, especially during school vacations. A tiny girl with braids who loved to play among the mango trees and help in the garden. You did meet her a few times, but they were just kids, right? They would hardly remember each other." The revelation hit Jake like a lightning bolt. Fragments of memories began to form in his mind. A shy, brown-haired girl who sometimes played near the orchard when he visited his grandfather. Someone who knew exactly where to find the sweetest fruits, who seemed to instinctively understand the rhythms of the farm. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I didn't think it was important until I saw how you looked at each other," Mrs. Johnson replied, with the straightforward honesty that characterized her. "Sarah always taught Emily that she shouldn't feel superior or inferior to anyone, that the fact her mother worked here didn't give her any special rights. I'm sure Emily didn't even remember the connection when she arrived here. She was running away, desperate, and ended up being guided by her instincts to a place that represented safety in her childhood memory." Jake ran his hand through his hair, trying to process all the information. Emily was not a stranger who had appeared out of nowhere. She was someone who, in a way, had always belonged to that place. The ease with which she adapted to the ranch, her instinctive knowledge of medicinal plants, the way the animals seemed to trust her immediately, all made sense now. "Mrs. Johnson," he said, turning to face the cook, "where exactly is Emily living now?" "In a small room behind a flower shop on Flower Street, in downtown Springfield. The owner is an Italian gentleman named Giuseppe, who felt sorry for her when he saw her pregnant looking for work." Mrs. Johnson paused, choosing her words carefully. "But, Jake, she is very thin, very pale. The work at the flower shop is hard for someone in her situation, and I'm sure she is earning very little." The concern in Mrs. Johnson's voice made Jake's chest tighten. He had allowed his wounded pride and Margaret's influence to blind him to what really mattered. Emily was alone, pregnant, working in inadequate conditions while he stayed at the ranch, lamenting her absence. "I'm going to get her," Jake declared, heading toward the office door with renewed determination. "Wait a minute," Mrs. Johnson held him by the arm. "Before you rush after her, you need to be sure of what you want to say. That girl has already suffered too much with a man who didn't know what he wanted. She has to come back into her life for real." Jake paused, considering the cook's words. She was right. Emily deserved clarity and honesty, not more uncertainty and emotional confusion. "I know what I want to say," he finally replied. "I want to say that she has a home here if she wants it, that I was an idiot for letting Margaret influence my judgment, and that—" He hesitated, admitting to himself what he had been trying to deny for weeks. "And that I can't stop thinking about her." Mrs. Johnson smiled, the first genuine smile Jake had seen on her face since Emily's departure. "Then go, boy, but take something for her." She disappeared into the kitchen for a few minutes, returning with a small glass jar filled with homemade mango jam and a letter in a yellowed envelope. "The jam is for her to regain her strength. The letter—" Mrs. Johnson paused dramatically. "It's something I found in the attic of the house she was living in. A letter that Sarah wrote to her grandfather when she stopped working here, thanking him for the years of employment and leaving a special recipe for dulce de leche that had belonged to her mother." Jake accepted the items, feeling the symbolic weight they carried. The letter represented not just a connection between the families, but a bridge between the past and the future unfolding before him. "Mrs. Johnson," he said, kissing the forehead of the woman who had become his second mother, "thank you for taking care of all of us, even when we are too stubborn to accept help." "Just go already," she replied, shooing him away with her hands, as she had done when he was a child trying to sneak candy before lunch, "and bring our girl back home." As Jake headed to his room to change clothes before going to town, the seeds of a deeper understanding about destiny, family, and love began to germinate in his heart. Emily hadn't come to Hope Ranch by chance. She'd returned to the place that had always been her home, even if she didn't consciously know it. The question now was whether he could convince her to stay, not out of necessity or lack of options, but because they had both found something worth cultivating together. Bella Vista Florist occupied a narrow building in downtown Springfield, squeezed between a pharmacy and a lingerie store. Jake parked his white Ford truck in front of the establishment, watching through the window filled with colorful arrangements. The contrast between the vibrancy of the flowers and the almost Spartan simplicity of the place made him wonder what Emily's working conditions were like inside. Joseph Martin, the owner, was a 72-year-old Italian who had immigrated to the U.S. in the 1970s. Short and stocky, with completely white hair, and always wearing a dark green apron stained with dirt, he possessed the typical temperament of someone who had dedicated his entire life to caring for plants. When Jake entered the florist, the doorbell announced his arrival, with a soft chime that echoed among the pots and arrangements. "Good morning," greeted Joseph, lifting his eyes from a bouquet of red roses. He was finishing. "How can I help you?" "Good afternoon, Mr. Martin. I'm looking for Emily Fields. I heard she works here." The Italian's face closed slightly, taking on a protective expression that Jake recognized immediately. It was the same expression Mrs. Johnson used when someone asked about personal matters concerning those in her care. "And who wants to know?" Joseph asked, positioning himself between Jake and the back of the shop where Emily was presumably working. "My name is Jake Thompson. Emily stayed at my ranch for a few weeks, and I would like to talk to her." "Ah, you're the farmer." Joseph's expression softened slightly, but he still maintained caution. "Emily spoke of you. She said you were very kind to her, but that she had to leave because of family issues." Jake felt a pang of guilt upon hearing the diplomatic version Emily had given for her abrupt departure. "That's exactly why I'm here," Jake explained, removing his hat in a show of respect. "I need to clarify some misunderstandings and, Invite her to come back. Joseph studied him for a few moments, clearly assessing his intentions. Finally, he nodded. Emily is in the back, organizing the plants for tomorrow's wedding arrangement. But Mr. Thompson, he added with a warning tone, that girl has already suffered a lot. If your intentions are not serious, it's better to leave now. They are serious, Jake replied firmly, holding the jar of jam and Mrs. Johnson's letter against his chest. Very serious. Joseph led him through a narrow corridor filled with buckets of cut flowers, yellow gladiolus, white chrysanthemums, vibrant gerberas, until they reached the small back patio where Emily was working. She was kneeling beside a low table, sorting stems of white roses and trimming the thorns with a small pair of gardening scissors. Jake stopped abruptly upon seeing her, the visual impact far greater than he had anticipated. Emily was visibly thinner, despite the 7-month baby bump protruding beneath the light blue apron she wore. Her face had lost the healthy rosy color it had at the ranch, replaced by a concerning pallor. Her once shiny hair was tied back in a simple ponytail that revealed deep, dark circles under her eyes. But it was when she looked up and saw him that Jake felt his heart tighten definitively. Emily's gaze mixed, surprise, caution, and a deep sadness that made him want to rush across the patio and hug her immediately. "Jake," she whispered, dropping the scissors and leaning on the table to slowly rise. "What are you doing here?" "I came to get you," he replied simply, taking a few steps in her direction but stopping at a respectful distance. I want to apologize and, well, bring some things I discovered." Emily wiped her hands on her apron, a nervous gesture that Jake had learned to recognize. She was clearly struggling between the impulse to run to him and the instinct of self-preservation that kept her at an emotional distance. "What did you find out?" she asked cautiously. Jake lifted the jar of jam and the letter, stepping closer. "I found out that you didn't lie about anything. I discovered that Mark Johnson is indeed an abuser with a history of violence. I found out that you were a dedicated teacher who helped underprivileged children. And I discovered something that will surprise you as much as it surprised me." Emily furrowed her brow, intrigued despite herself. "Your mother," Jake continued, "Sarah Fields, worked at Hope Ranch for almost 10 years when you were a child, and you—" He paused, smiling softly for the first time since he arrived. "You used to play in the mango orchard during school breaks." The impact of the revelation was immediate. Emily leaned heavily against the counter, her eyes widening as fragments of memories began to surface. I remember," she murmured, bringing a hand to her forehead. "I remember an older boy who was sometimes there. He taught me how to climb the big mango tree to get the sweetest fruits, and there was a very kind old man who always gave me a candy when my mom finished working." "My grandfather," Jake confirmed, stepping closer, "and the boy was me." Tears began to stream down Emily's cheeks, but they were not tears of sadness. It was as if pieces of a puzzle she hadn't even known she was assembling finally clicked into place. "That's why I felt at home from the first day," she whispered. "That's why everything felt so familiar. Mrs. Johnson told me everything." Jake extended the yellowed letter. "Your mother left this when she stopped working at the ranch, a recipe for dulce de leche and a thank you note for my grandfather." Emily accepted the letter with trembling hands, immediately recognizing her mother's neat handwriting. As she read, more tears flowed, but now accompanied by a smile that lit up her face for the first time in weeks. "Thank you very much for the years of dignified work," she read aloud. "I hope that one day my daughter Emily can repay the kindness you showed to our family. My mom always talked about a very good boss who treated her like a person, not like a maid. It was your grandfather." "And apparently," Jake said, his voice heavy with emotion, Fate wanted you to repay his kindness by being kind to me." Joseph, who had been discreetly observing the whole scene from the back door, cleared his throat softly. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, "but Emily, sweetheart, you look very pale. When was the last time you ate something?" The question brought Jake back to immediate reality. He looked at Emily more closely, noticing not only the paleness, but also how she leaned against the counter, as if she didn't fully trust her own legs. "I had coffee this morning," Emily replied vaguely, avoiding Jake's concerned gaze. "What time?" Joseph insisted. "Around 6 in the morning?" Jake glanced at the clock. It was almost 3 in the afternoon. "Emily," he said, his voice taking on an authoritative tone that she recognized as similar to what he used with worried employees at the ranch, "you can't go 9 hours without eating while pregnant with twins." "I know that," she replied a bit defensively, "but today was very busy at the shop, and Joseph needed me to finish the arrangements for tomorrow's wedding, and you thought the arrangements were more important than your health and your children's?" Jake interrupted, moving closer to see her dark circles more closely. "It's not that simple," Emily sighed, revealing an exhaustion that went beyond the physical. "Joseph provides me with food and a place to sleep, in addition to the salary. If I don't work properly, I could lose all of that." The revelation of Emily's precarious situation hit Jake like a punch to the gut. He had been at the ranch lamenting her absence while she struggled to survive in conditions unsuitable for a pregnant woman. "Joseph," Jake turned to the Italian, "can I take her out for lunch? I promise to bring her back to finish the work." "You can take her," Joseph replied with a paternal smile. "In fact, you can take her forever if you want. Emily is a good girl, but flower shop work is not for a pregnant woman. I only hired her because she really needed it, capiche?" Emily looked between the two men, feeling a mix of gratitude and irritation that they were discussing her life as if she weren't present. "I can decide for myself," she said firmly. "And I'm not going anywhere until Jake explains exactly why he's here and what he wants from me." Jake stared at her, admiring the strength of character she displayed even in adverse conditions. It was exactly this combination of vulnerability and determination that had drawn him to her since their first meeting in the orchard. "I want you back at the ranch," he said bluntly. "I want you and the babies to have a safe place to live. I want to continue discovering this connection that has existed between us since childhood. And I want the chance to take care of you the way I should have from the beginning. And your sister, Margaret, will have to accept it." Jake replied determinedly, "It's my ranch, my life, my decision. And if she can't respect that, the problem is hers, not ours." Emily watched him for long moments, searching for signs of doubt or uncertainty in his green eyes. Finding only sincerity and an intensity that made her heart race, she finally nodded. "All right," she said, starting to untie her apron, "but with a few conditions." "What conditions?" "First, I work at the ranch. I don't want to be supported. I want to contribute something useful. Second, if Margaret ever comes back, treat me poorly and I will leave immediately, and you won't try to stop me. And third—" She hesitated, as if the next condition was the most important. "You need to be absolutely sure of what you want, because I can't go through another disappointment. My children need stability." Jake stepped closer until he was right next to her, close enough to smell the soft fragrance of flowers that lingered in her hair and clothes. "Emily," he said, his voice low and heavy with emotion, "I've never been so sure of anything in my life. You belong to the ranch as much as I do. In fact, maybe more, considering your roots there are older than mine." He extended his hand, a simple gesture that carried the weight of an unspoken promise. "Shall we go home?" Emily looked at the outstretched hand, then at Jake's face, where she could see reflected the same vulnerability and hope she felt in her own heart. Slowly, she placed her hand in his, feeling the familiar sense of security that only his touch could provide. "Let's go home," she agreed, her voice choked with emotion. Joseph watched the scene, with eyes shining with contained tears, remembering his own youth and the loves that bloom against all odds. As the couple made their way to the front of the shop, he murmured a small prayer in Italian, asking for those two young people to find the happiness they deserved. The afternoon sun painted the streets of Springfield with golden hues as Jake and Emily emerged from the flower shop. She carried a small bag with her few belongings. He held Mrs. Johnson's gifts, and both walked toward the truck with the feeling that they were about to start a new chapter in their lives, a chapter that this time they would write together. The drive back to Hope Ranch was marked by a comfortable silence, broken only by the sound of Jake's truck engine and the occasional comments about the landscape gradually changing from the urbanization of Springfield to the green fields of the countryside. Emily kept her hands intertwined over her belly, feeling the twins move more intensely, as if they too sensed they were returning home. "They're restless today," she commented, smiling when one of the babies gave a particularly strong kick. Jake glanced sideways at her, noticing how her face had regained some color just by being away from the enclosed environment of the flower shop. "It must be because they know they're going back to where they have space to grow," he replied, slowing down as they approached the ranch gate. When the truck stopped in front of the main house, Mrs. Johnson emerged from the kitchen, still drying her hands on her apron as if she had been eagerly awaiting their return. Her face lit up with a maternal smile when she saw Emily carefully getting out of the vehicle. "Girl!" she exclaimed, quickly approaching to hug Emily with the warmth of a mother. "I've missed you. This ranch has been lifeless without you here." "Mrs. Johnson," Emily returned the hug with intensity, feeling tears of relief welling in her eyes. "Thank you for taking care of everything, and for helping Jake understand the truth." "I didn't do anything that life wouldn't have done anyway," replied the cook, stepping back to observe Emily critically. "But you are too thin, child. We need to fix that right away. I made a fish stew with cornbread that will make you and these babies strong as oxen." While the two women chatted, Jake unloaded Emily's small luggage, watching the scene. With a sense of completeness he hadn't felt in weeks, the ranch had truly regained its life with her return. "Emily," he said, approaching the two, "I thought you could go back to the staff house, but this time I want you to feel truly at home. We can renovate whatever is necessary, expand the rooms." "The house is great just the way it is," Emily interrupted, lightly touching his arm in a gesture of gratitude. "I just need a safe place for me and the babies. The rest we can build slowly." Emily's words, especially the use of "we," made Jake's heart race. It was the first time she spoke about the future, including him so naturally. That night, during dinner in the spacious kitchen of the main house, Emily shared details about her weeks in Springfield that made Jake realize how much he had underestimated the difficulties she faced. Working at the flower shop was physically demanding for a pregnant woman, involving long hours on her feet, carrying heavy pots, and constant exposure to fertilizers and pesticides. Her little room at the back of the shop was small and stuffy, lacking proper ventilation, and her salary barely covered her basic needs for food and medical care. "Why didn't you reach out to me sooner?" Jake asked, serving her another plate of stew. "Why did you let the situation get to this point?" Emily chewed slowly, choosing her words carefully. "Because I needed to prove to myself that I could survive on my own," she finally replied. "After everything I went through with Mark, after the way his sister treated me, I needed to know that I wasn't someone who could only live depending on others." "And you proved it," said Mrs. Johnson, serving dessert, homemade dulce, de leche made with the recipe that Sarah had left years ago. "No one can say you didn't try, but sometimes accepting help isn't weakness, it's wisdom." In the days that followed Emily's return, a new routine was established at the ranch. She officially took over the organization of administrative documents, working at the large table on the back porch, where the afternoon breeze made the heat more bearable. Her experience as a teacher made her naturally organized and detail-oriented, qualities that proved invaluable in sorting through decades of accumulated papers. In addition, Emily was working on the medicinal garden project with renewed enthusiasm. During the cooler mornings, she toiled among the herbs she had planted: chamomile, lemon balm, boldo, mint, and several other plants whose healing properties her grandmother had taught her about since childhood. Jake often helped her, preparing beds and irrigation systems, and these mornings of working together became precious moments of conversation and mutual discovery. "My grandmother used to say that every plant has its personality," Emily explained one of those mornings while transplanting lemon balm seedlings. "Chamomile likes morning sun but prefers shade in the afternoon. Lemon balm wants soil that's always moist but not waterlogged. It's like taking care of children. Each one has its specific needs." Jake, who was preparing a new bed for the rosemary seedlings, paused to watch her. There was something mesmerizing about the way she worked with the plants, with an instinctive gentleness that revealed knowledge passed down through generations. "You're going to be an amazing mother," he said spontaneously. Emily stopped working, looking at him with a mix of surprise and emotion. "Sometimes I'm scared," she admitted, wiping her dirt-covered hands on an old towel. "Scared of not knowing how to do everything. Right, of not being able to protect them, of not being strong enough." "Emily," Jake moved closer, kneeling beside her in the bed. "You escaped a violent situation, pregnant and without resources, survived alone for months, and still maintained your dignity and kindness intact. If that's not strength, I don't know what is." Emily's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled, touching her belly, where the twins seemed to be dancing. "They're going to grow up here," she said, looking around, at the green fields stretching to the horizon, at the main house with its welcoming porch, in fruit trees brimming with life. They'll have land to run on, fresh air to breathe, animals to care for, and a mother who loves them more than anything in the world," Jake added softly. The moment was interrupted by Mrs. Johnson's arrival, who brought a pitcher of cold passion fruit juice and still warm cheese puffs. "You two need to take a break and have something to drink," she said, pouring the juice into large glasses. "And Emily, a letter has arrived for you from the post office." Emily accepted the envelope with curiosity, immediately recognizing her mother's handwriting. Inside, she found 2 yellowed sheets of paper and a recent letter from Sarah. "It's from my mother," she explained to Jake and Mrs. Johnson. "And there are some old recipes here. Look, it's the original recipe for caramel that she left for your grandfather, Jake. And there's another one here, Grandma Maria's peanut candy for the summer festival." "Summer festival!" exclaimed Mrs. Johnson, clapping her hands. "I almost forgot. Every year we have the St. John Festival here at the ranch at the end of June. It's been a tradition since Jake's grandfather's time." Jake smiled, remembering the festivities of his childhood, the huge bonfire in the yard, the sound of the accordion echoing through the night, the smell of roasted corn and ginger tea. "Would you like to help organize it this year?" he asked Emily. "It would be a way for you to get to know the neighbors better, and for them to get to know you." Emily looked at the recipes in her hands, imagining herself preparing the traditional pastries that her family had made for generations, sharing those traditions with the community that was becoming her new family. "I'd love to," she replied, and for the first time since arriving at the ranch, her voice carried not only hope but genuine excitement for the future. The following weeks were a whirlwind of preparations. Emily proved to be a natural organizer, coordinating with the neighborhood women the traditional menu for the festival, while Jake and the men took care of the structural aspects, setting up tents, preparing the bonfire, organizing the dance space. The kitchen of the main house transformed into a true pastry factory. Emily, assisted by Mrs. Johnson and several neighbors who came to help, prepared cornbread, peanut candy, coconut truffles, and the famous caramel from her grandmother's recipe. Her hands, now 8 months pregnant, moved with precision between pots and ovens, creating flavors that awakened ancestral memories in everyone who tasted them. "Girl, where did you learn to cook like this?" asked Mrs. Benedita, a 70-year-old neighbor considered the best cook in the area. "From my grandmother when I was little," Emily replied, sprinkling sugar over a tray of cheese puffs. "She used to say that cooking is an act of love, that every ingredient carries the energy of the one who prepares it." "Your grandmother was wise," agreed Mrs. Benedita, watching how Emily worked even with her large belly, always with a smile on her face. "And you inherited not only the recipes, but her heart as well." The day before the festival, while Emily was making the final touches on the sweets, she felt a different pain in her lower back. It wasn't the common pain from the weight of pregnancy, but something more intense that made her stop and lean against the kitchen table. "It's okay, little ones," she murmured, caressing her belly. "It's not time for you to come out yet, just wait a little longer." Jake, who was organizing the final details of the decorations, noticed the look of discomfort on Emily's face. "Are you feeling something?" he asked, moving closer immediately. "Just some back pain," she replied, trying to downplay the concern. "It must be the fatigue from the preparations." But during the night, the pains intensified, and Emily had trouble sleeping. She walked around the small house, occasionally stopping to take deep breaths when a stronger contraction hit her. They weren't regular contractions yet, but they were definitely different from anything she had felt before. On the morning of the St. John Festival, Emily woke up determined not to let the discomfort interfere with the event she had helped organize with so much love. She put on a dress. In the blue and white flowered square, she tied her hair in a loose bun and joined the other women for the final preparations. The celebration began at dusk, when the sun painted the sky with orange hues that reflected on the colorful bunting scattered across the yard. The bonfire was lit in the center of the space, creating a magical atmosphere where the flames danced against the starry sky. The sound of the accordion, played by Mr. John Parker, the local accordionist at 75 years old, began to echo across the fields, calling everyone to the celebration. Emily positioned herself behind the candy booth, serving the pastries she had prepared with great care. Neighbors she had not yet met approached to greet her, praising the flavors and asking for the recipes. Gradually, she realized she was no longer seen as an outsider, but as a natural part of that community. "Mrs. Emily," said Mr. Manuel, an 80-year-old retired farmer, "your caramel is just like what my mother made when I was a child." "Where did you learn?" "From my grandmother, Mr. Manuel. And my grandmother learned from her grandmother. These are recipes passed down from mother to daughter for generations." "That's what makes it beautiful," replied the old farmer, his eyes shining with emotion. "That's how traditions stay alive." When it was time for the square dance, Jake approached the booth where Emily was working, extending his hand in a formal invitation. "Would you do me the honor of dancing with me?" he asked, making an exaggerated bow that drew laughter from those around. Emily hesitated for a moment, aware of her large belly and the limitations that pregnancy imposed on her movements. But Jake's encouraging smile and the expectant looks from the neighbors convinced her. "Of course," she replied, accepting his hand, "but you'll have to dance for 2, or rather, for 3. The square dance began slowly, with simple steps that allowed even the most inexperienced participants to join in. Emily moved carefully, but there was something magical about that moment. Dancing under the stars, surrounded by people who were beginning to accept her as family, feeling the babies move to the music as if they too were dancing. "Look at the tunnel!" shouted the square dance caller, and the couples formed a tunnel with their raised arms. When it was Emily and Jake's turn to pass under the tunnel, she felt a stronger contraction that made her stop abruptly. Jake immediately noticed that something was happening. "Emily," he whispered, concerned. "It's okay," she replied softly, but her breathing was quicker. "I just need to sit for a bit." They discreetly moved away from the dance circle, heading to an improvised bench made of wooden planks under the shade of a tree. Emily sat down carefully, one hand on her belly, the other holding Jake's. "I think the little ones are excited about the party," she joked, trying to ease the tension. But for the next half hour, the contractions became more regular and intense. Emily tried to hide it, continuing to chat with the neighbors who approached to greet her, but Jake was watching every change in her expression. "Emily," he finally said, "I think we need to go to the hospital." "Not yet," she protested. "We still have to serve the cornbread, and there's the surprise of the fireworks you planned." "The fireworks can wait," Jake interrupted firmly. "You and the babies can't." It was at that moment that Mrs. Johnson approached, having noticed their whispered conversation. "What's happening?" she asked, and a single look at Emily's face was enough for her to understand. "Oh my, the babies want to be born today!" The revelation quickly spread among the nearby people. Within minutes, Emily found herself surrounded by a circle of experienced women, all offering advice and preparing to help in any way necessary. "We're going to the hospital now," declared Jake, already heading for the truck. "Wait!" Emily held his arm, looking around at the lively party, at the neighbors who had become friends, at the place that had become her home. "Let me say goodbye properly. This was the first St. John celebration in my life where I truly felt at home." Jake understood the importance of that moment for her. He helped Emily to her feet, and together they said their goodbyes to the guests, receiving hugs, blessings, and promises of visits to the hospital. When they finally headed for the truck, the sound of the accordion still echoed across the fields, mixed with the voices of neighbors singing "The Balloon Falls." Emily looked back one last time, imprinting that scene in her memory. The crackling bonfire, the bunting fluttering in the night breeze, the people who had become her extended family. "Ready?" Jake asked, starting the engine. "Ready," Emily replied, touching her belly where the twins seemed eager to meet the world waiting for them. "Let's introduce our children to the world." The road to Springfield Municipal Hospital had never seemed so long for Jake. Emily's contractions were getting closer together, and he alternated his gaze between the dimly lit road and her face, which was focused on breathing deeply as she had learned in the few prenatal visits she had managed to attend in town. "Breathe, Emily, just like you taught me when I got nervous about the corn buyer's visit," Jake said, trying to keep her calm while carefully accelerating around the curves of the rural road. Emily managed to laugh between contractions, remembering the day Jake had been anxious before an important meeting, and she had taught him breathing techniques she had learned over the years as a teacher dealing with stressed children. "It's working," she replied, squeezing his hand that was resting on the gear shift. "Jake, what if something goes wrong? What if I can't do it? There are 2 babies." "Nothing is going to go wrong," he said with confidence. A conviction that he wasn't sure he truly felt, but that Emily needed to hear. "You are the strongest woman I know, and the doctors are here to help with anything." When they arrived at the hospital, an experienced nurse named Sarah greeted them in the obstetric emergency room. She was a robust woman in her 50s, with grey hair tied up in a practical bun, and a reassuring smile that immediately instilled confidence in both of them. "How many weeks?" Sarah asked as she helped Emily settle into a wheelchair. 35 weeks and 4 days, Emily replied precisely. "A little early, but nothing to worry about," the nurse reassured them. "Babies born at this age usually do very well." The admission was quick. Emily was taken to a delivery room specifically equipped for multiple births, while Mark filled out the necessary paperwork. He had insisted on paying for a private room, wanting to ensure that Emily had the utmost comfort during the process. Dr. David Smith, the hospital's obstetrician for over 20 years, examined Emily and confirmed that she was in active labor. "The babies are well positioned," he explained to the couple. "The first is head down, the second is a bit transverse, but we still have time for him to settle better. We'll monitor closely." The next hours passed in a mix of anxiety, pain, and anticipation. Mark stayed by Emily's side the entire time, holding her hand during the strongest contractions, wiping her sweaty face with a damp towel, whispering words of encouragement. "You're doing so well," he said, watching the monitors that displayed the baby's heart rates. "They're strong and healthy. Listen to how fast their hearts are beating." During a break between more intense contractions, Emily held Mark's face with both hands. "Mark," she said, her voice choked with emotion and physical effort, "I need you to know that, no matter what happens, these months at Hope Ranch have been the best of my life. You gave me back the feeling of having a family." "Emily," he gently kissed her forehead, "nothing is going to happen. And when we leave here, we will build the family we've always dreamed of." At 5:43 on Sunday morning, after nearly 8 hours of labor, Miguel was born, a boy weighing 5 pounds and 4 ounces, with light brown hair like his mother's, and a vigorous cry that echoed through the delivery room. 12 minutes later, Julia arrived, a girl weighing 4 pounds and 11 ounces, with delicate features and a curious expression that seemed to question why she had been taken from her warm place. "They are perfect," Mark whispered, tears streaming down his face as he watched the two little beings being examined by the medical team. "Emily, you did this. You brought them into the world." Emily was exhausted but radiant, extending her arms to receive the babies when the nurse brought them wrapped in pink and blue blankets. "Hello, little ones," she murmured, her voice breaking with emotion. "I can finally see your faces." Miguel calmed immediately upon hearing his mother's voice, while Julia opened her huge, dark eyes that seemed to try to focus on Emily's face. Mark leaned in, gently touching the tiny hands that instinctively closed around his fingers. "They recognize you," Nurse Sarah said, smiling as she adjusted the baby's monitors. 8 months of hearing your voice every day. To them, you are already the most important person in the world." In the following hours, while Emily rested and the babies were monitored in the nursery, Mark found himself experiencing feelings he never imagined possible. Watching Miguel and Julia through the nursery glass, he felt a deep connection with those two little lives that technically did not carry his genes, but already occupied a central place in his heart. "Aren't they beautiful?" said a voice behind him. Mark turned and found an unfamiliar woman, a lady in her 50s, with brown hair cut in a simple bob, wearing a light green blouse and a denim skirt. There was something familiar about her features, especially the brown eyes that closely resembled Emily's. "I'm sorry," the woman said, noticing the confusion on Mark's face. "I'm Sarah Fields, Emily's mother. I received a call from the hospital saying she had given birth." Mark felt as if an important piece of the puzzle had finally fallen into place. This was the woman who had worked on his grandfather's ranch, who had left the letter with the caramel recipe, who had raised Emily with such care. "Mrs. Fields," he said, extending his hand respectfully, "I'm Mark Thompson. Emily is living on my ranch. I mean, the ranch that belonged to my grandfather where you worked." Sarah's face lit up with recognition and surprise. "Mark Thompson, you are Antonio's grandson, the boy who played in the orchard with my Emily when she was little." "The same," Mark confirmed, smiling. "It seems fate wanted to reunite our families after all these years." Sarah studied Mark closely, noticing the way he looked at the babies in the nursery, the genuine concern in his eyes when he spoke about Emily, the way his shoulders carried the responsibility of someone who truly felt committed to the well-being of those he loved. "Can I ask you a personal question?" she said. "Of course." "Do you love my daughter?" The direct question caught Mark off guard, but he answered without hesitation. "I do," he said, surprising himself with how easily the word came out. "I love Emily, and I love these babies as if they were my own." Sarah nodded, satisfied with the answer. "She has suffered a lot, you know," she said, turning her gaze back to the twins sleeping peacefully in the nursery. "That man in Los Angeles, he destroyed her trust in many things, but the way she spoke about you in the letters you wrote to me, I think you managed to show her that not all men are the same." "Was she writing about me?" "She was," Sarah smiled. "She talked about the ranch, the medicinal plants she was growing, Mrs. Johnson, and she spoke a lot about a kind farmer who treated her with respect and care. She didn't need to say the name for me to know she was in love." The revelation warmed Jake's heart. All those months, while he struggled to understand his own feelings, Emily had already realized she was in love with him. "Mrs. Johnson," Jake said, "I would like to make a formal request. I would like to ask for your blessing to marry Emily." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, studying his face, searching for signs of sincerity and commitment. "Are you absolutely sure of what you're asking?" she asked. "Emily is not just a beautiful woman who needs help. She is a mother with 2 small children, with a traumatic past, with fears and insecurities that will need a lot of patience to heal. Are you sure you want to take all of this on?" "I am sure," Jake replied without hesitation. "Emily and these babies are my family now, and I want to make everything official so she never has to worry about safety or stability again." Sarah smiled, extending her hands to hold Jake's. "Then you have my blessing. But there is one condition." "What is it?" "I want to see this ranch where my daughter will live. I want to see the place where she will raise my grandchildren. I want to meet Mrs. Johnson, whom she talks so much about, and I want to be sure that she has truly found a home." "You are welcome any time," Jake said sincerely. "In fact, I was hoping you could stay with us for a few days after Emily is discharged. She will need help with the babies, and I'm sure there's no one better to teach the things only a mother knows." As they spoke, a nurse approached, informing them that Emily had woken up and was asking to see the babies. Jake and Sarah headed to the room, finding Emily sitting up in bed with a tired but radiant expression of happiness. "Mom!" Emily exclaimed upon seeing Sarah enter the room. "How did you know?" "The hospital called me as the emergency contact," Sarah explained, kissing her daughter's forehead. "I came as quickly as I could. How are you feeling, my love?" "Tired, sore, but completely happy," Emily replied, looking at Jake, who was holding her hand. "Mom, I want you to really get to know Jake. He was the one who saved me when I needed it the most." "We've already met," Sarah said, smiling, "and we've talked about some important things." Emily looked between her mother and Jake, noticing a connection that hadn't been there before. "What kind of important things?" Jake moved closer to the bed, kneeling beside it, to be at eye level with Emily. "Emily," he said, his voice choked with emotion, "I know we are still getting to know each other better. I know you have been through a lot and deserve time to heal completely. But I want you to know that I love you. I love you. I love Michael and Julia, and I want to build a real family with you." Emily felt tears welling in her eyes, not from sadness or fear, but from a deep joy she hadn't felt in years. "Jake, you don't have to give me an answer now," he continued, holding her hand with both of his. "I just wanted you to know how I feel, so you have no doubts about my feelings or about your safety at the ranch." Emily looked at her mother, who nodded encouragingly, then back at Jake. "I love you too," she said simply. "I think I fell in love with you that first day in the orchard, when you could have sent me away but chose to help me. I was just afraid to admit it, afraid of being disappointed. Again." Jake leaned in to kiss her forehead, then her lips in a soft kiss full of promises for the future. "You will never have to be afraid again," he whispered against her lips. "We will raise Michael and Julia together at the ranch, surrounded by love and safety." At that moment, Nurse Sarah entered the room carrying the two babies. "Someone here is asking to see their mommy," she said cheerfully. Emily extended her arms to receive her children, and Jake positioned himself beside her on the hospital bed. Sarah watched the scene with tears in her eyes, her daughter finally at peace, surrounded by people who truly loved her. "Hello, Michael," Emily whispered, kissing the forehead of the little boy who snuggled against her chest. "Hello, Julia," she said to the little girl who yawned sleepily in her arms. "I want you to meet your dad, Jake. He will take care of us forever." Jake gently touched the baby's cheeks, feeling a wave of protective love he had never experienced before. "Hi, little ones," he said softly. "Welcome to the family. We'll be home soon so you can see the ranch, the animals, and Mommy's garden." "And Mrs. Johnson," Emily added, laughing through her tears. "She must be preparing chicken soup for us when we get there." As the small group huddled in the hospital room, witnessing the first moments of the twins in the world, they all knew they were witnessing not just the birth of two children, but the birth of a new family. A family built not only by blood, but by choice, love, and the determination to create something beautiful together. Outside, the sun rose over the fields of Springfield, promising a new day full of possibilities. The first days of Emily and the twins back at Hope Ranch were a mix of intense joy and challenging adaptation. The staff house had quickly been transformed into a small maternity ward, with a double crib set up in the main room, and piles of diapers, clothes, and blankets scattered throughout. Mrs. Johnson had transformed into a dedicated grandmother, alternating between the main house's kitchen, where she prepared nutritious broths for Emily to recover from childbirth, and the smaller house, where she assisted with the care of Michael and Julia. Sarah had decided to stay for 2 weeks to help her daughter adjust to the routine with the babies. Her presence brought not only practical support, but also a sense of familial completeness that Emily had not experienced since the death of her grandmother years ago. The two women worked together during the day, taking turns caring for the twins and sharing family stories that helped Emily better understand her own roots. Your great-grandmother, Mary of Sorrows, was a midwife in the Lexington area, Sarah recounted one afternoon while rocking Michael to sleep. "She taught me that a child needs 3 things to grow well: milk from the breast, love in the heart, and solid ground beneath their feet." Emily, who was breastfeeding Julia in the rocking chair that Jake had specially bought for her, smiled at the story. "And she said that we know when we've found the right place to raise our children because the land speaks to us," Sarah added, looking out the window at the green fields of the ranch. "I think you've found your land, my daughter." Jake spent most of his time divided between farm responsibilities and caring for his new family. He had hired 2 temporary hands to help with the heavier work, freeing him to stay close to Emily and the babies whenever possible. It was touching to see him holding the little ones with a gentleness that contrasted with his calloused hands, whispering conversations about their future on the ranch, about the horses they would learn to ride and the trees they would climb. "Michael will be a farmer like his father," Jake said, watching how the boy firmly grasped his finger, "and Julia will tend to the medicinal garden with her mother." "How do you know?" Emily asked, amused by his predictions. "Look how he examines everything around him, always attentive. And she—" Jake gently tickled Julia's little belly, which responded with a toothless smile. She has the same calm demeanor as her mother. She will be a healer. It was on a July afternoon when the babies turned 3 weeks old that the tranquility of the ranch was once again interrupted by the arrival of Margaret. The familiar sound of the white Corolla on the access road made Emily's stomach tighten, but this time she did not feel the same fear she had experienced months earlier. Holding Julia in her arms and watching Jake play with Michael on the living room rug, she realized that she now had much more than just hope. She had a real family to protect. "It's your sister," Emily said calmly, moving closer to the window. Jake sighed, rising with Michael in his arms. "I'll talk to her outside," he said, kissing Emily's forehead. "I don't want her to disturb you." "No," Emily gently held his arm. "This time, I want to be part of the conversation. We are a family now, and families face things together." Margaret stepped out of the car with her usual rigid posture, but Jake noticed that she carried not only her usual work folder, but also a large, colourful package that seemed to be a gift. Her expression was more controlled than hostile, as if she had come with a specific agenda in mind. "Jake," she greeted him formally, kissing her brother's cheek without much warmth. "I heard the babies were born." They were, Michael and Julia. "They are healthy and growing well." Jake maintained a neutral tone, waiting to see what Margaret's position would be. "And Emily?" she asked, looking toward the smaller house where she could see movement through the open windows. "She is recovering very well. Would you like to meet your nieces?" The word nieces caught Margaret off guard. It was the first time Jake referred to the children in this way, clearly establishing his place in the Thompson family. "Actually," Margaret said, hesitating slightly, "I came here to apologize. And to talk about some important things." Jake raised his eyebrows, genuinely surprised. "To apologize to you and Emily," Margaret continued. "After our last conversation, I did some of my own research about her history. I found out that everything she told us was true, and I also discovered the connection of her family to our grandfather." "Did Mrs. Johnson tell you?" "No. I found the old employee records in the company archives. Sarah Fields worked here for almost 10 years, and according to grandfather's reports, she was an exemplary employee." Margaret paused, choosing her words carefully. "Jake, I was wrong. About Emily, about her motivations, about everything." Before Jake could respond, Emily appeared on the porch of the main house, holding Julia in her arms, with Sarah right behind her holding Michael. She had dressed carefully, a light blue blouse that highlighted her eyes, and a skirt that comfortably accommodated her body, still recovering from childbirth. "Margaret," Emily greeted politely, approaching with determined steps. "I'm glad you came to meet the children." Margaret observed Emily closely, immediately noticing how much she had changed since their last meeting. It was not just the recent motherhood. There was a newfound confidence in her posture, a serenity that had not existed before. This was no longer the vulnerable and insecure woman who had fled the ranch months ago. "Emily," Margaret said, "I came here primarily to apologize to you. My behavior last time was unacceptable. I let my prejudices and my protective instincts regarding Jake cloud my judgment." Emily considered the words for a moment before responding. "I accept your apology," she said simply. "I understand that you were protecting your family. I would do the same if I were in your place." Emily's mature response further unsettled Margaret's defenses. May I see the babies?" she asked, looking at the 2 small figures wrapped in the women's arms. "Of course!" Emily approached, positioning Julia so that Margaret could see the little girl's face better. "This is Julia, and that's Michael, with Grandma Sarah." Margaret looked at the baby and felt something unexpected happen in her heart. Julia had huge, dark, curious eyes that seemed to study the face of the new visitor with genuine interest. Her hair was dark and soft, and there was something in her delicate features that reminded her of Jake when he was a baby. "She's beautiful," Margaret murmured, extending a finger that Julia immediately grasped tightly. "And Michael?" Sarah stepped closer, introducing the boy who was attentively observing everything around him. "They are perfect," said Margaret, and for the first time Jake heard genuine emotion in his sister's voice. "Absolutely perfect." "Do you want to hold them?" offered Emily, surprising everyone present. Margaret hesitated, clearly touched by the offer. "I don't have much experience with babies." "No one does, until they do," said Sarah with maternal wisdom, extending Michael into Margaret's arms. "They won't break, and this one is especially sturdy." Margaret accepted Michael with extreme care, watching as he settled comfortably in her arms. The baby studied her with his serious, dark eyes, then yawned and closed his eyes, seemingly approving of his new aunt. "He trusts you," observed Emily. "Michael is very selective about whom he accepts." "Just like his father," murmured Margaret, glancing at Jake, who was watching the scene with a mix of surprise and emotion. "Margaret," Jake said, "you mentioned there were important things to discuss." "Yes," she continued, holding Michael, but directed her attention to Emily. "I want to formalize a few things. First, I would like to set up an education fund for Michael and Julia. Regardless of what happens in the future, they will have guaranteed college education." Emily began to protest, but Margaret gently interrupted her. "It's not charity. It's family responsibility. If Jake considers these children as his own, then they are my nieces and nephews, and I have obligations to them. Secondly," Margaret continued, "I want to help legally formalize your situation. Jake, if your intentions are serious regarding Emily and the children, you need proper legal protection." Jake and Emily exchanged glances, communicating silently in the way couples who know each other deeply can. "Actually," Jake said, "we were already discussing this. Emily, would you like to marry me?" The question, asked so spontaneously in front of the entire family, made Emily laugh through the tears that began to form in her eyes. "Jake Thompson," she said, shaking her head with amusement, "you just proposed to me in front of your sister and my mother, holding our daughter?" "Our daughter," he repeated, smiling at hearing Emily use the plural possessive. "And yes, that's exactly what I did. So, what's the answer?" "The answer is yes, of course," Emily replied, leaning in to kiss him softly. "But next time you want to ask me something important, maybe you could plan a little better." "I promise," Jake said, kissing her again, as Julia yawned sleepily between them. Margaret watched the exchange with an emotion she hadn't expected to feel. There was something genuinely beautiful in the way Jake and Emily interacted, a mutual respect and tenderness that she recognized as true love. "Well," she said, still holding Michael, "at least I won't have to worry about organizing an elaborate wedding. I imagine you want something simple." "Very simple," Emily confirmed. "In fact, we were thinking of having the ceremony right here at the ranch with the neighbors and friends who have become our family." "And I would like one thing," Jake added, looking at Margaret with hope. "I would like my sister to be my maid of honor." Margaret felt tears forming in her eyes for the first time in years. "It would be an honor," she said, her voice choked. "And Emily, if you want, I can take care of the legal aspects of the marriage, the adoption of the children by Jake, all the necessary paperwork." "Thank you," Emily replied sincerely. "It would mean a lot to me to know that the children are legally protected." The gift that Margaret had brought turned out to be a complete kit of baby clothes, from practical onesies to small, elegant outfits for special occasions. There were also 2 identical teddy bears, a blue one for Michael and a pink one for Julia, and a savings account opened in each child's name. "This is the start of the educational fund I mentioned," explained Margaret, "and these," she showed 2 small silver identification bracelets, "are to remind them that they are part of the Thompson family." That night, after Margaret left, promising to return the following week to start organizing the legal details of the wedding, the family gathered on the porch of the main house to share a simple yet meaningful dinner. Mrs. Johnson had prepared chicken stew with okra, accompanied by rice and seasoned breadcrumbs, and dessert of caramel from Emily's great-grandmother's recipe. "I never thought I would see the day," commented Mrs. Johnson, watching Jake help Emily settle the babies after feeding. "This ranch has become a real home again." "It always was a home," Sarah said, looking around with nostalgic eyes. "Even when I worked here years ago, your father, Jake, and then your grandfather always treated this place as something sacred. Land where love is planted, family is harvested." "And now," said Emily, watching Michael and Julia sleep peacefully in their portable cribs, "our children will grow up here, learning about the land, about traditions, about what it means to be part of a community." Jake approached from behind, wrapping Emily in his arms and resting his chin on her shoulder. "They will learn that family is not just blood," he murmured, "but people who choose to care for one another." As the sun set over the golden fields of Hope Ranch, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, the small family silently contemplated the sense of completeness they had finally found. The struggles of the past had been transformed into solid foundations for the future, and the promise of lasting love hung in the air like the scent of blooming flowers that began to blossom around the property. August brought with it a renewed energy to Hope Ranch. The preparations for Emily and Jake's wedding had mobilized not only the family, but the entire rural community around them. The date was set for the last Saturday of the month, coinciding with the full moon, which, according to Mrs. Johnson, would bring luck and prosperity to the union. Emily had recovered her post-pregnancy strength with surprising speed, partly due to the attentive care of Sarah and the nutritious broths prepared religiously by Mrs. Johnson, but mainly because of the genuine happiness that radiated from her since Jake had officially proposed. The twins, now 7 weeks old, had developed distinct personalities that charmed everyone around. Michael was contemplative and observant, spending long periods awake, simply studying people's faces or the movements of leaves through the window. Julia was more expressive and social, smiling at anyone who approached and making little sounds that Mrs. Johnson insisted were attempts at communication. "This girl is going to be as talkative as her mother," declared the cook one morning, watching Julia talk animatedly with a mobile of birds that Jake had hung over the crib. "And the boy will be thoughtful like his father." Emily was in the main house's kitchen, finalizing the last details of the wedding menu with the neighborhood women who had volunteered to help. Mrs. Benedita coordinated the production of appetizers, chicken croquettes, cheese pastries, and codfish balls. Mrs. Rosa, a specialist in sweets, was responsible for the wedding cookies and the 3-tiered cake decorated with fresh flowers from the garden. Emily would personally handle the preparation of the main dish, roasted pig with special seasoned breadcrumbs and a vegetable vinaigrette made from produce harvested from the ranch's own garden. "Girl," said Mrs. Benedita, watching Emily chop onions with professional precision, "where did you learn to cook like this? Those hands don't lie. You have the blood of a cook." "I learned from my maternal grandmother," Emily replied, smiling as she recalled afternoons in the rustic kitchen of the farm where she grew up. "She used to say that cooking for those we love is a way to put our soul into the food." "Your grandmother was wise," agreed Mrs. Rosa, whipping egg whites for the cake. "And by the way Jake looks at you, he'll be eating a lot of soul for the next 50 years. The comment drew laughter from all the women, creating an atmosphere of camaraderie and joy that made Emily feel truly part of that community. Jake, meanwhile, was taking care of the structural aspects of the celebration. Together with the men from the region, he had built a small wooden and bamboo pergola in the side garden of the main house, decorated with white fabrics and flowers picked from the property. Father Anthony, who had served the region for over 30 years, agreed to officiate the outdoor ceremony, a special concession considering the couple's unique history and their deep connection to the land. "I've seen many weddings in my years of priesthood," the priest commented during one of his visits to discuss the ceremony details, "but I've rarely seen a couple so obviously destined for each other. There's something special in the way you look at each other. It's because we met when we were children," Jake explained, holding Emily's hand as they talked on the porch. "Even without consciously remembering, I think our hearts recognize something familiar." A week before the wedding, Margaret arrived at the ranch loaded with documents and gifts. She had fulfilled her promise to take care of all the legal aspects, from the marriage certificate to the initial papers for the adoption of Michael and Julia by Jake. But it was her second surprise that truly moved the couple. "I have something for you," she said, extending a thick envelope to Emily. "I found this in our grandfather's personal files, along with other old correspondence." Emily opened the envelope with curiosity and pulled out several time-worn photographs. The first showed a young woman with familiar features holding a small child next to a well-dressed elderly man in front of the main house of the ranch. Emily immediately recognized her mother, very young and herself, as a child of perhaps 5 years. "My God," she whispered, carefully running her finger over the photograph. "It's Mom and me, with your grandfather." But it was the second photograph that truly took her breath away. It showed the same scene, but this time there was a boy of perhaps 10 years next to the elderly man, smiling at the camera with an expression that Emily recognized immediately. "Jake." She showed the photo to him, who examined the image with growing surprise. "That's me," confirmed, touching the photograph with admiration. "I remember this photo. It was taken during a New Year's party at the ranch. I must have been about 10. "You really did meet when you were children," Margaret murmured, observing their reactions. "And there was one more thing in the envelope." She pulled out a handwritten letter on the ranch's letterhead, dated December 1998. "It's a letter from Grandfather to the family lawyer," Margaret explained. "He was establishing a small educational fund for Sarah's daughter, saying she was a special child who deserved opportunities to study." Emily read the letter with tears. In her eyes, discovering that Jake's grandfather had not only valued her mother's work, but had also cared about her educational future. "The fund was never used because you moved to Los Angeles," Margaret continued. "But the money still exists, growing with compound interest for over 20 years. Consider it an early dowry." The revelation that there was an even deeper connection between their families profoundly moved Emily and Jake. It was as if fate had spent decades weaving the threads that would unite them at the right moment. "There's one more thing," said Margaret, pulling out a small velvet box from his pocket. "Our grandfather left specific instructions on when this should be delivered. Apparently, he had a feeling about the future." Jake opened the box and found a vintage engagement ring with a simple yet elegant solitaire diamond, accompanied by a gold band that matched another identical one. "They belonged to our grandmother," explained Margaret. "He left instructions that they should be given when Jake married for true love to someone who understood the value of land and family." "Margaret," said Jake, visibly moved, "are you sure these are very precious family heirlooms?" "I'm sure," she replied, looking at Emily, who was admiring the ring with reverent awe. "Emily, would you like to wear our family's jewelry?" "It would be an honor," whispered Emily, allowing Jake to slide the engagement ring onto her finger. The fit was perfect, as if it had been made specifically for her. On the eve of the wedding, the ranch buzzed with final preparations. Mrs. Fields had arrived earlier in the week, bringing with her a dress that had belonged to Emily's great-grandmother. A simple yet elegant 1940s design in cream silk with delicate embroidery on the sleeves and neckline. With minor adjustments made by a local seamstress, the dress fit Emily perfectly, who had nearly regained her pre-pregnancy figure. "You look beautiful, my daughter," said Mrs. Fields, helping Emily try on the dress one last time. "Your great-grandmother would be proud to see you wearing this on your wedding day." Mrs. Johnson prepared a special dinner that last night of being single, gathering the entire extended family on the porch of the main house. Michael and Julia were peacefully sleeping in their portable cribs, oblivious to the celebration happening around them, but their presence made the occasion even more special. "I want to make a toast," said Jake, standing up with a glass of wine in hand, "to Emily, who came to my ranch as a stranger and became the light of my life. To Michael and Julia, who taught me that being a father has nothing to do with blood and everything to do with love. And to everyone here who has shown what it truly means to be part of a family." "And I," said Emily, rising with her glass of grape juice, "want to thank each person here for showing me that it is possible to start over, that it is possible to trust again, and that sometimes the place where we belong has been waiting for us all along." Margaret, who had remained silent for most of the dinner, finally stood up. "Emily," she said, with rare emotion in her voice, "when you arrived here, I saw you as a threat. Now I realize that you were exactly what this family needed. You brought life back to the ranch, peace to Jake, and gave me 2 beautiful nephews to spoil with gifts." The final comment drew laughter from everyone, easing the emotional tension that had built up. "And now," said Mrs. Johnson, ever practical, "everyone to bed early. Tomorrow is the wedding, and a bride who doesn't sleep well ends up with dark circles in the photos." As everyone dispersed to their homes and rooms, Emily stayed on the porch for a few minutes, gazing at the stars shining in the clear August sky. Jake approached, wrapping her from behind in a gentle embrace. "Nervous?" he asked, kissing her neck softly. "A little," she admitted, relaxing against his chest. "But it's a good kind of nervous, like when you know something amazing is about to happen." "Tomorrow, you will officially become Emily Thompson," Jake murmured, "and Michael and Julia will officially become my children." "Our family," said Emily, turning in his arms to look him in the eyes. "After everything we've been through, all the uncertainties and fears, we will finally have our official family." "Forever," Jake agreed, sealing the promise with a soft kiss under the stars of the Kentucky countryside. That night, Emily dreamed of golden fields, children running among the trees, and a large table surrounded by family and friends. She dreamed of a future built on the solid foundations of true love, mutual trust, and the certainty that she had finally found her forever home. The dawn of Saturday, August 29th, brought with it a perfectly clear blue sky, with not a single cloud to compromise the outdoor ceremony. Emily woke to the sound of robins and the scent of jasmine flowers that Jake had specially planted around the pergola where they would marry. Through the window of her room, she could see the already bustling activity in the main house, where Mrs. Johnson was coordinating the final preparations for the banquet. "Good morning, future Mrs. Thompson," said Mrs. Fields, entering the room, carrying a tray with coffee, warm cheese bread, and fresh fruit. "How did the most beautiful bride in the Kentucky countryside sleep?" Emily laughed, sitting up in bed and adjusting the white cotton nightgown she wore. Her hair fell loosely over her shoulders, and there was a special glow in her eyes that had nothing to do with makeup. It was the genuine brightness of someone who had found complete happiness. "I slept wonderfully," she replied, accepting the steaming coffee. "I dreamed of our future here on the ranch, with Michael and Julia growing up, maybe with more children." "More children?" Mrs. Fields raised an amused eyebrow. "Easy there, girl. Let these two grow up a bit first." From the main house came the sound of cheerful voices and the characteristic noise of a kitchen in full swing. The neighbors had arrived early to help with the final preparations, turning the space into a true community celebration. The aroma of roasted pig in the wood-fired oven mixed with the scent of flowers decorating the entire garden. "Where are the babies?" Emily asked, noticing the unusual silence. "Mrs. Johnson took them to the main house so you could get ready." "In peace," Mrs. Fields explained. "Jake is there too, helping to take care of them. That man is already a dedicated father." Emily smiled. "Adaptações, Helena, Emily, Margarida, Margaret, Aracatuba, Springfield, Aparecida, Sarah, Miguel, Michael, Julia, Dona Conceição, Mrs. Johnson, São Paulo, Los Angeles, Rancho, Ranch, Bisavó, great-grandmother, Padre Antonio, Father Anthony, remembering the scene from the previous night when Jake had insisted on giving the nighttime bottle to the two babies, claiming he wanted Emily to rest completely before the wedding. At 10 in the morning, Margaret arrived accompanied by a hairstylist and makeup artist from Springfield, a special gift for Emily. The professional, a cheerful woman named Carmen, had specialized in country weddings and brought all the necessary equipment to create an elegant yet natural look. "Nothing too elaborate," Emily requested, watching the products being organized on the antique vanity that had belonged to Jake's grandmother. "I want to look like myself, just a bit more festive." "Perfect," Carmen agreed, starting to work on Emily's hair. "I'll do a romantic half-up style with some loose strands, and a natural makeup that enhances your eyes. You have very delicate features." While getting ready, Emily could hear through the open windows the sounds of the party being organized in the garden. Jake had hired a small country music band, guitar, viola, and accordion, that was rehearsing the songs they would play during the ceremony and the subsequent celebration. "It's looking beautiful out there," Margaret commented, peeking through the window. "Jake organized everything with so much care. The pergola looks perfect with the flowers and white fabrics. He has always had good taste," Sarah said, adjusting the folds of the vintage dress on Emily's body. "Even as a child, when he played here at the ranch, he was always careful with beautiful things." Noon arrived quickly, and Emily was finally ready. Her great-grandmother's dress had been perfectly tailored, accentuating her feminine silhouette without being extravagant. Her hair was styled in a romantic updo that let a few golden strands escape in the sunlight, and the soft makeup highlighted her brown eyes and gave a natural rosy tone to her lips. The family engagement ring sparkled on her finger, and she carried a simple yet elegant bouquet of white roses and greenery picked from the garden. "Are you ready?" Sarah asked, offering her arm to lead her daughter to the ceremony location. "More than ready," Emily replied, taking a deep breath to calm her last-minute nerves. "We're about to create our official family." The walk from the smaller house to the main garden took only a few minutes, but it felt eternal to Emily. With each step, she could see more guests rising from the wooden chairs arranged in a semicircle around the decorated pergola. She recognized neighbors who had become friends, ranch employees, people from the Springfield market where she sold products from her medicinal garden, and even Joseph, the owner of the flower shop where she had worked, who had made a point to attend the ceremony. But her eyes immediately fixed on Jake, who was waiting for her next to Father Anthony under the flowered pergola. He wore a simple yet elegant navy suit, a white shirt and a discreet tie. His hair was carefully styled, but she could see that he had nervously run his hand through it several times. What touched her the most, however, was the expression on his face when he saw her approaching, a mix of deep love, admiration, and such intense emotion that made her own eyes fill with tears. Mrs. Johnson was seated in the front row, holding Michael in her lap, while Margaret held Julia. The babies seemed fascinated by all the movement and colours around them, observing everything with their curious, dark eyes. When Emily reached the improvised altar, Sarah gently kissed her forehead before handing her hand to Jake. "Take good care of her," she whispered to the groom. "With my life," Jake solemnly replied, accepting Emily's hand and intertwining their fingers. Father Anthony opened the ceremony with words about love, commitment, and the importance of building a family based on mutual respect and faith. Emily and Jake had chosen personal vows, written by themselves, that reflected their unique journey up to that moment. "Emily," Jake said, pulling a folded paper from his suit pocket, "when you arrived at my ranch that March morning, I thought I was offering shelter to a stranger. I didn't know I was receiving back a part of my soul that I didn't even know was lost." His voice trembled slightly, but he continued with determination. "You taught me that family is not just blood, but choice. That true love is the one that grows through difficulties, that strengthens with challenges, and that flourishes when two people decide to walk together, regardless of what fate brings." Emily felt tears streaming down her cheeks, but she maintained her radiant smile. "I promise to love you every day of my life," Jake continued. "I promise to be the father that Michael and Julia deserve, even knowing that I will never be able to love these two little ones more than I already do. I promise to work alongside you to make this ranch not just our home, but a place where our family can grow in love, peace, and happiness." When it was her turn, Emily took her own paper from the small bouquet. "Jake," her voice was low but clear, easily reaching the ears of everyone present. "When I fled Los Angeles pregnant and scared, I wasn't looking for love. I was only looking for safety. You gave me so much more than that." She looked directly into his green eyes, ignoring the tears that continued to fall. "You restored my ability to trust, to dream of the future, to believe that I deserve to be loved for who I am, not for what I can offer. You looked at me and my babies and chose to love us as a complete family, without reservations, without conditions." Jake tightened his grip on her hands, visibly moved. "I promise to be your partner in all moments, in the happy and the difficult. I promise to work alongside you to make this ranch prosperous and this home filled with love. I promise to raise our children, all those who come, knowing that they are the fruit of the purest love I have ever felt." The exchange of rings was made in reverent silence. The only sounds were the wind rustling through the leaves and the distant chirping of birds. The gold rings that had belonged to Jake's grandparents seemed to carry the weight of family history, connecting the present with the past and promising a solid future. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," said Father Anthony with a paternal smile. "Jake, you may kiss the bride." The kiss was gentle, filled with promises and restrained emotion. When they parted, Emily and Jake turned to the guests as an officially united family, receiving applause, shouts of joy, and a shower of rose petals thrown over them by the children present. The celebration that followed was a genuinely community affair. Tables were set up in the side garden, adorned with white linen tablecloths and centerpieces made from flowers and herbs from Emily's garden. The feast included the famous roasted pig she had prepared with special seasonings, accompanied by rice with peki, banana farofa, fresh vegetable vinaigrette, and the traditional sweets that the neighbors had lovingly made. "I've never seen a more beautiful couple," commented Mr. Manuel, the retired farmer, raising a glass of caipirinha. "And I've never tasted a more delicious roasted pig. This girl cooks like a queen." Jake and Emily circulated among the tables, receiving hugs, humorous marital advice, and heartfelt blessings from people who had become family in spirit. Michael and Julia were passed from arm to arm, spoiled by everyone present who delighted in the babies representing the continuity of family tradition on the ranch. When it was time for the couple's dance, the band played a soft instrumental version of "Oh, How I Miss You," and Emily and Jake danced slowly under the starry sky, surrounded by candles and the loving gaze of all who cared for them. "How do you feel, Mrs. Thompson?" Jake whispered in Emily's ear as they danced. "Complete," she simply replied. "For the first time in my life, completely complete." The party continued late into the night with music, dancing, and shared stories. Neighbors recounted anecdotes about Jake's childhood, Sarah shared funny memories from Emily's upbringing, and Mrs. Johnson moved everyone with a speech about how rewarding it was to see her boys find happiness. When the last guests finally departed, Emily and Jake found themselves alone on the porch of the main house, gazing at the garden still, adorned under the light of the full moon. Michael and Julia were sound asleep in their portable cribs, exhausted from the day's excitement. "We did it," Emily said, resting her head on her husband's shoulder. "We created our family." "And this is just the beginning," Jake replied, kissing the top of her head. "We have a lifetime ahead of us to create memories, to watch these children grow, to build something even more beautiful than we already have." Emily looked at the wedding ring that now complemented her engagement ring, then at the sleeping children, and finally at the man, who had turned her desperate escape into a journey toward true love. "Jake," she said softly, "do you think your grandparents would approve?" "I'm sure they would," he replied, gazing at the stars shining over the ranch. "I think they always knew you would come home." As the full moon illuminated the fields of Hope Ranch, the newly formed family silently contemplated the feeling that they had not only married, but sealed a destiny that had been woven for generations. The future stretched before them, like the golden fields surrounding their home, full of possibilities and promises of lasting love. March arrived at Hope Ranch, bringing not only the first anniversary of Emily's arrival, but also the promise of a new life growing quietly in her womb. The twins, now 8 months old, had become small, tireless explorers, crawling everywhere and turning the house into a constant adventure of discoveries and little surprises. Michael had developed a particular fascination for the farm animals, especially the chickens, which he observed with scientific patience before attempting to imitate them with enthusiastic babbling. Julia, on the other hand, showed a natural attraction to plants, often being found chewing on mint leaves or trying to pull flowers to examine them more closely. "Your children have inherited your connection to the land," Jake observed one morning, watching Emily work in the medicinal garden while the twins played among the beds, each exploring the world in their own way. "Our children," Emily corrected automatically, smiling as she saw Michael trying to communicate with a chick that had escaped from the coop. "And I think it's not just genetic inheritance. It's about growing up in a place where they can touch the earth, breathe fresh air, and learn that they are part of something greater." Jake approached from behind, wrapping his arms around her and resting his hands on her belly, which was beginning to show the first signs of the new pregnancy. Emily had discovered she was expecting another baby just 2 weeks ago during a routine checkup, and the news had filled the couple with a quiet, profound joy. "How are you feeling today?" he asked, softly kissing her neck. "Better," she replied, relaxing against his chest. "The morning sickness is easing, and this little one seems calmer than the twins were." "Or little girl," Jake added, tenderly stroking her belly. "Mrs. Johnson is sure." "It's a girl. Mrs. Johnson has theories about everything, Emily laughed. Yesterday, she said Julia will be a veterinarian because she talks to animals, and that Michael will be an agricultural engineer because he organizes sticks in perfect rows. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sarah, who had moved permanently to the ranch 2 months ago. She now occupied a small room in the main house, helping with the care of the twins, and becoming an indispensable presence in the family routine. Her experience as a grandmother and her practical wisdom had proven invaluable, especially during times when Emily needed to rest more, due to the new pregnancy. "The little ones are hungry," announced Sarah, approaching with Michael in her arms and Julia clinging to her leg, "and a special letter has arrived for you." Emily accepted the envelope, immediately recognizing the official seal of the Springfield City Hall. Inside, she found a notification about the approval of a project she had submitted months earlier. The transformation of part of the ranch into an experimental rural school, where children from the region could learn not only the traditional curriculum, but also sustainable agriculture techniques, animal care, and environmental preservation. "Jake!" she exclaimed, showing him the document. "It was approved! Our rural school has been approved!" Jake quickly read the paper, his face lighting up with growing enthusiasm. "Emily, this is amazing! You did it! We will be able to offer quality education for the children in the area without them needing to move to the city." The rural school project had originated from a casual conversation between Emily and some neighborhood mothers who were concerned about the quality of education offered at the distant municipal school, where their children spent hours on the school bus and received an education disconnected from the rural reality in which they lived. Emily, using her training in pedagogy and her passion for environmental education, had developed an innovative proposal: a school that would operate on part of the ranch, offering a complete elementary education integrated with sustainable agricultural practices. The children would learn math by calculating organic fertilizer proportions, study science by observing the life cycles of plants and animals, and develop their English through projects documenting local rural traditions. "When can we start?" Jake asked, hugging Emily joyfully. "The document says we can begin activities next semester," she replied, rereading the conditions. "We need to build 2 suitable classrooms, hire at least 1 more teacher, and prepare all the educational documentation." "We can do it," Jake declared with determination. "Margaret can help us with the legal aspects, and I know trustworthy builders in Springfield. As for the teacher, I already know who I'm going to invite," Emily interrupted. "Carmen, my old colleague from Los Angeles. She has always wanted to work at a different school, one more connected to nature." The following months were a whirlwind of activities. The construction of the 2 classrooms progressed rapidly, built with sustainable materials and designed to have large windows opening to the surrounding fields and gardens. Emily worked tirelessly on developing the curriculum, creating activities that integrated traditional learning with practical environmental education. Carmen enthusiastically accepted the invitation to join the project, moving from Los Angeles with her young daughter to participate in the educational adventure. Her arrival brought not only pedagogical expertise, but also a youthful energy that perfectly complemented Emily's more traditional approach. "It's amazing to teach the children to grow their own food," Carmen commented during one of the planning meetings, "and then use math to calculate the productivity of the garden, biology to understand photosynthesis, geography to study soil types." Meanwhile, Emily's pregnancy progressed smoothly. At 5 months, they discovered they were expecting a girl, confirming Mrs. Johnson's intuition. The little one would be named Sophia, a name that meant wisdom, and seemed fitting for a child who would grow up in an environment dedicated to learning and personal growth. Michael and Julia, now 1 year old, had become distinct and charming little personalities. Michael spoke simple words, but communicated mainly through precise gestures and expressive looks. Julia was more vocal, trying to sing along with the birds and chatting animatedly with anyone willing to listen. "Daddy!" shouted Michael one morning, wobbling toward Jake, who was returning from work in the fields. It was one of the few words he pronounced clearly, but he used it enthusiastically whenever he saw his father. "Daddy's home," Jake confirmed, lifting the boy into his arms and spinning him in the air, eliciting delighted laughter. "Where's Mommy?" "Mommy!" echoed Julia, appearing on the porch holding Emily's hand, who walked more slowly due to the growing weight of her belly. Scenes like this repeated daily, creating a family routine that filled the ranch with life and joy. Mrs. Johnson meticulously documented every milestone in the children's development, from their first words to their first steps, creating a memory album that would be treasured by the entire family. In September, when Sophia was born, a baby with dark hair and a serene temperament who seemed to observe the world with quiet curiosity, the Thompson family was complete in a way none of them had dared to dream years earlier. The delivery was easier than that of the twins, and Jake was present throughout the process, holding Emily's hand and whispering words of encouragement. When Sophia finally arrived, weighing 5 pounds and 10 ounces of rosy perfection, the couple looked at each other with a mix of admiration and deep gratitude. 3 children, Emily murmured, holding Sophia against her chest as Michael and Julia were introduced to their little sister. "Our family is complete." "For now," Jake joked, provoking an amused yet tired look from Emily. "Who knows? Maybe in a few years." "Jake Thompson," she said in a mock-serious warning tone, "let me recover from this first before we start planning the next." The Hope Rural School was officially inaugurated in February of the following year, with 15 students of varying ages coming from nearby properties. The opening ceremony was a community celebration, with parents, neighbors, and local authorities gathered to mark the beginning of a new chapter in rural education in the region. "This school represents more than education," Emily spoke during the ceremony, holding a sleeping Sophia in her arms, while Michael and Julia explored the nearby garden under Sarah's supervision. "It represents our belief that children can learn better when education is connected to their real lives, their communities, their land." The first year of the school exceeded all expectations. The children thrived in an environment that combined academic rigor with practical learning. Parents reported it was not just improvements in grades, but also in the children's overall interest in their studies and their own community. "My daughter now explains to me why we rotate the pastures," Mr. Manuel shared during a parent meeting. "And my grandson is teaching me composting techniques he learned in the school garden. They are really learning." As the school thrived, the rest of life on the farm also flourished. Agricultural production had diversified and become completely organic, providing not only for family consumption, but also for a growing market of conscious consumers in Springfield and neighboring towns. Emily's medicinal garden had transformed into a small natural pharmacy, where she prepared teas, ointments, and tinctures that were sought after by people from all over the region. Her reputation as a herbalist had grown organically through word of mouth from those who had been helped by her natural remedies. "You are a modern healer," Mrs. Bennett declared during a visit, observing Emily prepare an herbal cough syrup for a neighbor's child. "You have the gift of plants in your hands." Michael and Julia, now 2 years old, had become enthusiastic little helpers both at school and in the activities on the farm. Michael showed a natural ability to care for the animals, especially the chickens and the property's cat. Julia followed Emily around the garden, intuitively learning about plants and participating in the care of the garden. Sophia, at 6 months, was a cheerful and calm baby who seemed to absorb all the activity around her with serenity. She had become the unofficial mascot of the school, often peacefully sleeping in the portable crib set up in one of the classrooms while Emily taught her lessons. "She's going to grow up, thinking school is an extension of home," observed Carmen, watching Sophia smile at the students who made faces at her during recess. "And maybe that's the most natural way to learn," Emily replied, picking her daughter up. "Without artificial separations between life and education, family and community." It was on a March afternoon, exactly 2 years after Emily arrived at the farm, that the family gathered in the orchard where it all began. Mark had organized a special picnic to mark the date, spreading a checkered blanket under the shade of the same mango tree where he had found Emily that fateful morning. 2 years, Emily said, watching Michael and Julia play among the fallen fruits while Sophia slept peacefully in the stroller beside the blanket. "It feels like a lifetime, and yet it seems like it was yesterday." 2 years since you arrived here pregnant and scared," Mark held her hand, intertwining their fingers. "Look at what we've built together." Emily looked around, at the main house where Mrs. Johnson was preparing dinner, at the classrooms of the school where children would learn and grow, at the productive fields that sustained not only her family but several local workers, at the children who represented the future of this small community they had helped create. "You know what impresses me the most," she said, caressing her belly where she suspected a new life might be beginning to form, a suspicion still too recent to share. "It's that we haven't stopped growing. The school, the farm, our family, everything continues to expand, becoming better." "It's because we built on solid foundations," Mark replied, kissing her hand. "True love, mutual respect, honest work. These things create deep roots." As the sun set over the golden fields of Hope Farm, painting everything in shades of orange and pink, the family contemplated in silence the magnitude of what they had created together. What had started as a casual meeting in the orchard had transformed into a love story that transcended personal romance, becoming a force for positive transformation for an entire community. "Where do we go from here?" Emily asked, watching the stars begin to appear in the dark sky. "Wherever love takes us," Mark replied, wrapping her in his arms as they watched their children play in the golden light of the evening. "With our family, our land, our community. Together, we can go anywhere and create anything." And so, under the same stars that had witnessed their first meeting, the Thompson family celebrated not only the past that had united them, but the infinite future of possibilities that lay ahead. Hope Farm had become much more than a rural property. It had transformed into the heart of a community based on love, education, sustainability, and the belief that it is possible to build a better world, one family at a time. The mango trees whispered secrets to the night wind, the same trees that had witnessed the beginning of it all, now witnesses to a love that had blossomed and multiplied, creating fruits that would nourish future generations. Emily had found much more than a home. She had found her purpose, her family, and the certainty that some love stories are big enough to transform not just 2 lives, but an entire community.